Chapter 30. The voice and the changing face that went with it were with Eastvon almost all the time now. Very quiet most of the time, but still something he could hear and understand as long as he was listening in the right way. It was like having a brother again, only better because it wasn't going to abandon him as his brother had done. No, this was his new friend, someone he felt that was willing to be with him forever, someone with whom he could spend the rest of his life. He was beginning to teach him things. He could feel it sometimes, touching his brain lightly, smoothing parts of it out, scrunching other parts of it up, doing so in a way that it was beginning to build something within him. It was a strangely intimate sensation, as if someone had their hands in his head and was caressing his brain softly, and he wondered if he shouldn't be afraid. He was admittedly a little afraid at first, but then it stroked a particular part of his brain, and the fear diminished at least a little. There were shapes and figures beginning to form, strange, twisted and watery shapes that he could not only see, but that he felt he understood. That he felt somehow, if he just had the right tools and the right training, he could build. It could be glorious. The voice whispering in his head told him. Glorious, the next step in evolution, marvelous convergence, the extension of consciousness from bodies to a place both within and between bodies. It was wonderful, so wonderful that he almost didn't feel the pain as the burst came, stronger than it ever had been before, and it took him into another world. He could hear, behind that world, in the world before, the groans and cries of his fellow convicts, and knew that somewhere they were feeling it too, though not in the same way he was. Where the fingers in his brain moved delicately, stroking and rearranging in a way that he found at once sharp and exhilarating, they must have felt like their heads were being torn off. Indeed, once the burst faded and parts of his vision started to return, he did see that the man roughly across the table from him had beaten his head over and over against the surface of the table until that head had cracked open. Blood was pooling on the surface of the table, slipping over it and toward Eastvon. Eastvon watched it come, unconcerned, not moving even after it began to drip slowly into his lap. Was the man dead? He wondered, what had been the convict's name again? And then he decided that it didn't really matter. He wasn't dead, but he'd be dead soon. The alarm went off, sending them back to their cells. The other convicts looked almost in shock, some of them wandering aimlessly about, others just staring at the body, one hitting his head over and over again with his hands, but slowly they began to come back to themselves and move. Eastvon braced his hands on the table, to either side of the pooling blood, but before he stood, the voice said something to him. Wait, it said. Wait, he said, but why? But for once it didn't answer. He looked around him, at the other convicts moving back to their cells, and at the dead or dying man across the table from him. What did the voice know? If he listened to it, he'd be beaten by the guards, maybe killed. He again started to stand. Wait, the voice said again. He stopped, confused. Why should he wait? What did he gain by doing so? No, it was a mistake, and yet, he waited. The loudspeaker crackled out its warning, giving him 30 seconds to return to his cell. He counted down, and then counted a minute or so before he heard the cell doors clang closed. Now it's too late, he told himself. Now you are in trouble. He raised his hands and put them behind his head so that they wouldn't think him a threat. He waited. A minute later, the doors to the outer ring opened, and the guards came in. Only they didn't rush this time. They were moving more slowly, dressed in riot gear, and were flanked by 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, dressed in ordinary clothing. New prisoners, he wondered at first. But no, their hands were free. They were at ease, relaxed, and they were carrying various pieces of technical equipment. The door closed behind them. Slowly they moved through the ring of cells and toward the central circle. One of the guards raised his weapon. Shall I neutralize him, sir? He asked. One of the 4 people in the middle, a man just approaching middle age with salt and pepper hair, who was apparently their leader, shook his head. No need to bother him unless he becomes aggressive. Leave him as he is. The scientists came forward, sweeping their way into the room, moving back and forth, the guards awkwardly flanking them and sometimes bumping into them as they moved in unexpected directions. Eastvon just stayed there, watching them come. "Check and see if that one's dead," said the apparent leader. "Will do, sir," and one of the guards said. He came forward and examined the man slumped across the table, then stripped off one glove and pressed his finger into the man's neck. "He's dead," he said. "Huh," said one of the others in the group, a woman. "Ghastly." But despite saying that, she came forward and stared at the body with some interest, as if fascinated. She looked up at Eastvon. "What made him do it?" she asked. Eastvon hesitated a moment, then shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I didn't see it." "Of course you saw it," she said. "You were sitting right across from him." "I heard it," he said, "but I didn't see it." Two of the guards were assigned the body. They dragged it away by the arms, leaving an irregular smear of blood in its wake. The other guards and the people with their machines kept circling around, slowly narrowing their focus until they were all standing around Eastvon. "Right here," said their leader. "I'm sorry," he said to Eastvon, "but you'll have to move." "You can move now," said the voice to him. And he saw again Khan's ghastly face flash up before him, his strange smile. "You can go back to your cell." Eastvon nodded. Very slowly he stood and stepped out from the bench. "I want to go back to my cell," he said. Distractedly, their leader nodded. Yes, he said. "Go on then." Hands still up, he walked away. The guards' eyes followed him, as did their weapons. He could feel their eyes still on his back as he slowly went out of the inner circle and into the cell circle, and stood by the closed door of his cell, waiting. Chapter 31. "Right here," said Bryden, pointing at the instruments. "Right here's where that fellow was sitting." He turned to Callie Dexter. "I'm right, aren't I? Some kind of anomaly? Something that responds in a particular way to the crystalline structure of our marker?" "Seems so," she said. He smiled. "So directly under the floor, I'm assuming? We get something in here and we start to dig." Callie shrugged. "Not enough data to know for certain," she said. "Sure there's enough," said Bryden. "It led us here, didn't it? There's nothing here on the surface, so there must be something below." They put the one loose convict back in his cell, then sent someone back to the marker compound for a contact beam and an engineer to operate it. It took an hour, maybe more, but finally they were there and cutting through the floor. The going was slow at first, the engineer working the contact beam and some of the guards recruited to shovel out the rubble. There was a certain amount of danger, Bryden knew. They might break into a cavern or other space without breathable atmosphere. Then those standing near the hole might well be killed, which is why he stood a little distance away. Callie Dexter, though, was up close and leaning in, curious, watching the work. He imagined her eyes bugging out and her gasping for air, and it gave him a certain perverse satisfaction. He smiled, though he did eventually call for breathing equipment just in case, but no reason to stop the digging while waiting for it to arrive. They went down 3 feet, maybe 4, without finding anything beyond dirt and rocks shot through with veins of crystal. Maybe that was it, the crystal? Or maybe there was something there, deeper down. They needed another pulse, something they could correlate and trace and make sure they were on the right track, but it might be hours, even days before one came. Another 8 feet. The contact beam ran out of fuel and they replaced the cartridge. Then it overheated and the engineer hauled himself out of the hole by a rope, shaking his head. "We'll have to let it cool down," he said. "A few hours at least. Besides, it's time to sleep." "We should keep going," said Bryden. "I'm sure we're nearly there." The engineer wiped his face with his hands. "There's nothing down there," he said. "Nothing but rock. You're wasting your time." Bryden was eager to keep going, but looking at the face of the engineer and his fellow scientist, he realized it was prudent to wait. "All right," he said. "A little something to eat, a few hours of sleep, and then we'll start again." They would find it, Bryden was sure they would find it. He was waiting for them. The markers had led them to the spot. It had to be there. This was a test of faith, a test of his faith. If he was to be their prophet, he had to persist, had to go on. He pushed at the food in front of him, stirred it around his plate, but ate very little of it. Maybe the others had already gone off to catch a few hours of sleep on the spare cots in the guards' quarters, or alongside the technicians. "Penny for your thoughts?" said Dr. Dexter. She was still sitting across from him, observing him closely as if he were a specimen. He shook his head. "Bryden," she said, and for once her voice was gentle, a little hesitant. "You have to realize that there may be nothing there." "But the readings," he said. "You saw them as well as I did. We traced them as close as we possibly could." "The readings have been slightly different each time. Maybe there was for a moment and then not. Or maybe the markers are off somehow. Maybe they're trying to broadcast to something that no longer exists." But no, he thought. It couldn't be that way. It had to be real. He'd invested too much of his life in this project. He knew it was real. The marker was speaking to him. He could feel it when it pulsed. Unlike Callie, he had faith. He believed in this, believed in what he was doing. There had to be something there. "Look," she said. "I said it earlier. We need more data." "Data," he groaned. "What good will that do us? We know where we should be. We need to dig. We need to keep digging until we find something." "What are we going to find?" she asked. "How should I know?" he said. "But I'm sure something's there. The marker couldn't lead us here if it wasn't." Callie just looked at him, not speaking. "What?" he finally said. "Nothing," she said. "Why are you staring at me?" "You don't want to hear it," she said. "Tell me." Anger flashed in her eyes. "All right," she said. "You're obsessed. You've lost your objectivity. You've let your feelings run away with you. You're convinced yourself that the marker is a living thing. You don't know if you're coming or going. You don't know if you're engaged in an act of scientific discovery or an act of worship." "But I do know," thought Bryden. "It is an act of worship. How can you be so blind?" Trembling, he managed to keep his temper, but said nothing. When Callie spoke, her voice was calmer. "I know you're trying," she said. "We're all trying." Then she reached out and touched his hand. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been bitten. Gathering his plate and utensils, he stood and left. Another test, he thought. She's just another test, here to confuse me. She's not right. I'm right. The marker believes in me, not her. He stalked his way up and around the ring until an hour had passed, maybe more, and his legs were sore. Then he sat in the control room, leaning his elbows on the desk, waiting until enough time had gone by that he felt he could wake the others up and start them digging again. He tried to gather himself, tried to bury the irritation and doubt Callie had made him feel. Not Callie, he told himself. Dr. Dexter. How could she unsettle him so? But soon, he told himself, everything would change. Soon everyone will know that I was right and she was wrong. Then we'll see who unsettles whom. They dug deeper, another 16 feet, before the contact beam burnt out entirely. The engineer came up shaking his head. "Not made for this kind of work," he said. "It's better for clearing up small bits of rubble. You need something larger, a borer, something you can sit in." "A borer," said Bryden. "Well, let's bring one in." The engineer shook his head. "We don't have one," he said. "We'll have to get one sent in." "Let's do it," said Bryden. "How long would it take?" "A month," said the engineer. "Maybe 2." "A month? 2? There has to be another way," he said. The engineer shrugged. "We've got another contact beam or 2, he said. "We could burn those out as well, maybe at a little deeper, but I have to tell you there's no indication that anything's there. The rock, that's there. It's been in place probably for millions of years. There's no evidence that it's ever been disturbed." Another test, thought Bryden, tightening his lips. But who was to say that whatever was there down below hadn't been there for just that long? The marker technology could be eons old. "Go get them," he said, "and order a bore just in case." The engineer sighed and left. And that was when it happened. Another pulse, a strong one, which left Bryden lying on his back right next to the hole that had been dug, almost falling in. His head throbbing, and his vision almost obscured. For a moment he saw something or someone, but he couldn't make out their features. Then for a flash, it was his dead father's face, and then that too vanished and he was panting, lying there, staring into Callie's eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Near him, a guard had fallen to one knee and was groaning. One of his own researchers was tearing at his hair. From the cells, he could hear the cries and howls of the prisoners and realized that one or maybe two of them more were probably in the process of beating themselves to death. More corpses. More souls opening themselves to convergence, as he himself would do as well, only not yet. "Did you feel it?" he finally managed to say. Callie nodded. "I feel something," she said. One of her eyes, he noticed, was leaking tears, but only one of them. "Wasn't it glorious?" He couldn't stop himself from saying. She scowled. "Don't be a fool," she said, and pulled him up. The guards were scattered and confused. The other two scientists were slowly calming down, one of them standing there with tufts of his own hair in his hand, the other massaging her temples with her fist. "It's changing," said Bryden. "It's growing stronger." "It's becoming more dangerous," said Dr. Dexter. "We need to be careful." She gestured around her at the little patches of mossy tendrils clinging to the floors and walls. "You see what's happening to the corruption?" she said. "There's more of it now. It's spreading with the signal." "Then it's part of the marker," said Bryden. "We shouldn't be trying to clean it up. We should be encouraging it to grow." Callie shook her head. "It's just a byproduct," she said. "We should get rid of it. We need to be careful." She unstrapped her portable reader, getting the feed from the computers in the control room, checking the signal, figuring out where the exact center of this one was. She stood beside the hole, adjusting the apparatus until it was right. "Interesting," she said. "What?" said Bryden. "Try yours before I tell you," she said. "Let's see if we end up with the same reading." He took out his reader and turned it on. The other two scientists were doing the same with theirs. He waited for the new data to load, chose it, then waited for it to compute the nexus point and determine its location. At first, when the distance was still great, it looked just fine, as if he was exactly where he was meant to be. But as the machine dithered and the map scale became more precise, he realized that no, he was nowhere near the nexus. It was perhaps 100 feet away from it. He looked at Callie's screen. It was the same. "We need more data," she said. "Told you." He nodded, began to move here and there toward where he thought the new nexus was, Callie alongside him. The two other scientists followed behind, still a little shaken. "It moves," thought Bryden. But what was it? What did that mean? Perhaps it was something they couldn't see, something they couldn't be able to catch hold of. But he still kept walking, kept following his reader. They came to the wall at the end of the inner circle, but they weren't quite there. It was on the other side of that, somewhere in the cell ring. He exchanged a look with Callie, and they both headed for the opening into the cell ring and started down it, tracking down the hall. They passed half a dozen cells until finally they came to the one that his machine had told him was where the nexus had been. Inside, a young man sat on his bed, his feet flat on the floor, his hands flat on his knees. His eyes were closed, and he was breathing slowly in and out in a very measured way. "It's here now," said Bryden. "If we start digging right away, maybe we can catch it this time." "Bryden, no," said Callie Dexter, taking his arms. "What do you mean, no?" he said, turning to face her, angry. "Who's in charge here? If I say we dig, we dig." But she pulled him back, pulled him away from the bars of the cell, half whispering. She said, "Don't you recognize him?" Confused, he turned and looked back at the man sitting serenely in the cell. He was just one of the prisoners, so what? Then the man turned and opened his eye and looked at him and smiled. "He was sitting at the table when we first got the readings," said Callie. "He was sitting exactly where we dug." "No," said Bryden. "Now here he is, sitting just where we got our most recent reading." She sounded at once excited and confused. Her objectivity momentarily shot as well. "Bryden, we're not looking for something buried. We're not looking for a piece of equipment. We're looking for that man." Part 4. Chapter 32. He would listen to the voice. He would follow what it said. After all, it had not led him astray so far. No, quite the opposite. It had broken the bonds of his imprisonment. It had plucked him from hell and brought him here. "Are you comfortable?" the lead scientist asked him. What was his name again? Bryden? No, Bryden. He nodded. Can I get you something? He waited for the voice of the dead to tell him what was needed, but it didn't say anything. Bryden was staring at him. Istvan was not exactly sure how much time had passed. He looked at his head. Not now, he said. Maybe later? Asked Bryden, strangely eager. Istvan nodded. The movement felt odd. When the voice was more distant from him, everything felt false, slightly off. He felt too much like he had felt growing up, like the world was in charge of him rather than he was busy being in charge of the world. He didn't like that. Bryden was sitting across the table staring at him, much like the small gray man had done. What did Bryden want exactly? What is it like? Bryden asked. What? Said Istvan, surprised. It chose me too, he said. It reached out and touched me, and I knew how it became its prophet. Did it do that to you too? Not knowing what Bryden was talking about, Istvan hesitated, then nodded. Bryden broke into a smile. What does it want from us? He asked. What? Asked Istvan. It's here to save us, isn't it? Said Bryden. It wants only our own good. It wants to bring us convergence. Has it told you what convergence will consist of? Has it told you when it will come? Confused, Istvan just stared. Bryden watched him, expression open and waiting. When Istvan didn't respond, a flicker of irritation passed over his face. You can tell me, he said. I'm one of the chosen. Chosen for what? Asked Istvan. Is this a test? Asked Bryden. Are you toying with me? Who is this man and what did he want? Istvan listened for the voice to tell him what to do. It was speaking. It was always speaking. But it wasn't talking about the man in front of him. It wasn't telling him what to do. He tried to stare his way through this world and see the other world, see the face of one of his dead, and feel the voice in his mouth. But the veil wasn't ready to fall. He could not make it come. It chose me too, said Bryden, defensively. If it hadn't chosen me, you would still be in here. That was true, in a manner of speaking, thought Istvan. But even when Bryden had been staring right at him, he hadn't seen him. It had taken the other scientist, the woman, to recognize him. But to try to calm the fellow, he nodded. It did calm him. Bryden smiled and leaned back in his chair a little. Now the question is, what does it want us to do? But Istvan had a hard time paying attention. Inside his head, the voice had started to speak again. See me, it said. Understand me. Share me. See me, he wondered. See you? Bryden said, surprised. But I do see you. I'm right here, sitting across the table from you. No, said Istvan. See him. I want to see him. Him? Who is him? Asked Bryden. And when Istvan just stared, he said, Do you mean it? Do you mean the marker? Did he? What was the marker? He didn't know for certain, and the moment in which the voice seemed like it was giving him specific direction had faded into a quieter recital, not things he could hear exactly or know why they were important, but he could feel his brain taking them in. All right, said Bryden. Yeah, why not? You'll see it. That makes sense. We'll have to ignore a few security protocols, but I am, after all, the director of this project. This is more important than a few security protocols. The vid near the wall chirped. Bryden glanced at it briefly. When he turned back, there was yet another look of irritation on his face. You'll have to excuse me a moment, he said. This won't take long. He stood and approached the monitor. When he accepted the link, Istvan could see a woman's face, the face of the female scientist who had seen him and recognized him. What is it, Dr. Dexter? Asked Bryden. I'm busy. The prison is not in his quarters, said the woman. Do you happen to know where he is? First of all, Istvan heard Bryden say, he's not a prisoner, he's our guest. Second, yes, I know where he is. He's here with me. What's he doing there with you? Asked Dexter. Why didn't you follow protocol? I needed to talk to him, said Bryden. And I didn't think that protocol applied in this case. No, why not? I don't have to explain myself to you, Dr. Dexter, said Bryden. No, you actually do, said Dexter. And be careful what you say. You can be sure that it will appear in my report. He started to retort, then apparently reconsidered. Istvan watched him take a deep breath. You still don't understand, do you? He said. Understand what? The work we're doing here, the nature of it, how important it is. There's no turning back now, Dr. Dexter. Bryden, she said, bridling, you can't just... But that was all she had a chance to say because Bryden had cut the feed. He came back to the table, his smile restored. Now, where were we? He asked. Oh yes, you wanted to see it. Follow me. It was late, the workday mostly done. The few scientists still seated, working within their control room, turned and looked at them when they entered. Most of them turned quickly back to what they were doing, but one or two kept staring for a time. Bryden ignored them. He simply walked across the room and over to the observation window on the other side, drawing Istvan by the hand after him. There it is, he said, and pointed. Through the window, Istvan could see it, a strange twisting obelisk, blackish red, and with a reddish glow, inscribed all over it with strange figures. Or not so strange really, for as he looked at them, he began to see in them the warp and the weft of the other world, the material which the veil was made of when it fell, even the very lineaments and workings of the faces that came into the world. Even if he was allowed to look at it long enough, he felt he would even begin to see how these signs and symbols formed the hiss and mutter of the voices that came to him. Yes, here was the thing that brought everything together, that made everything make sense. Here was the key to everything in existence. It's beautiful, isn't it? Said Bryden. Istvan nodded. It was hard to take his eyes off it, but he slowly dragged them around to look at Bryden. I want to go in there, he said. There'll be enough time for that, said Bryden. Can't do everything all at once. No, said Istvan. Now. They stared at one another for a long moment. Bryden with a certain curiosity, Istvan steadily, his gaze hard. Finally, Bryden sighed and turned away. All right, he said, if that's what needs to happen. He slid his keycard through and entered the code. As the door slid open, more of the scientists turned to watch them. Then Bryden ushered him in. Not strictly protocol, he said, almost as if he were talking to himself. The door closed behind them. The room itself was not the same as in the room of the complex Istvan saw. It had a floor made of solid stone, and the bottom part of its chamber had been cut out of the rock with man-made walls built up on top of it. The marker rose in the middle of it, at once brutal and majestic. He could almost feel the energy emanating from it. Looking at it just made him dizzy. There, said Bryden. Now you've stood in the same room with it. Let's go. But Istvan ignored him. He began to move slowly toward the marker. Istvan, said Bryden, and louder, Istvan! He felt the man's hand on his shoulder and shook it off. He kept going. Bryden said something, but Istvan could hardly hear it over the sound of the voice guiding him forward, leading him toward the thing of beauty. It was in his head too, now he felt, or something like it anyway. All the necessary details and plans were stored up there now. That was what it had been doing as it prodded his brain. It had been making itself a space within him. But there was Bryden, grabbing his arm again and spinning him around. This irritated him, made him bare his teeth at him. But Bryden hung on. Not now, he was saying. We have to clear it first for sake of... And then the door behind him opened and Dr. Dexter came in. She looked angry, her face flushed and red. Bryden, she shouted. Even you have to know that this goes far beyond the boundaries of... But Istvan had stopped listening by then. Bryden was listening, though, distracted enough so Istvan could wrench himself free. He stumbled onward toward the marker. He cast a brief glance behind him, saw the two scientists shouting at one another, Bryden's gaze darting back and forth between Dr. Dexter and him. And when he was at the base of the marker itself, he reached out and pressed the flat of his palm against it, and he felt the veil of the other world falling over his gaze again, a tremendous power behind it. In the distance, someone was shouting. Slowly, carefully, he opened his mind up, unfolding it gently, and then he closed his eyes and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then he felt something flowing through him, sorting through his mind in a million ways at once. The other world rushed up and blotted everything else out, as if it never had existed. And who knows, maybe it never had. He looked up, and there, where the marker had been, was now the face and body of murdered Khan, 6 or 7 times larger than he had been in life. Khan was staring at Istvan, looking down at him. He bent farther down, brought his face closer until his head obscured much of Istvan's gaze, and Istvan was standing in his shadow. And then, blood still dripping from his neck, he smiled. Suddenly there was a rush of energy that made Istvan's body vibrate to the very core. All around him, he heard the sound of screams. His mind cleared itself in a burst of white light. He neither knew nor who he was, nor where he was, nor even if he existed. And then he collapsed. Chapter 33. It came in a burst big enough that even Grotter felt it. It made him shudder. He steadied himself on the rail, waited for the feeling of vertigo to pass. Orthor clutched his head and gave a little cry, then began beating his head against the desk. Others on the bridge were struggling as well, looking dazed or confused, or even crazed, and Grotter told himself once again that if it was this bad up here, thank God they weren't on the planet itself. When it finally died away, the first order of business was to get Orthor to stop beating his head against the console. The man's forehead was bruised and the skin had begun to split. In just a few minutes, he'd done himself serious damage. But it also gave Grotter an excuse to have other crew members bundle him off and put him in the brig, thus killing two birds with one stone. Now Blackwell would have no eyes and ears, would not know what he and the Grey Man were planning. Only then did Grotter turn to Ensign Haley. She was scribbling madly away, as if possessed, and mumbling under her breath as she did so. She kept spinning him image after image, all of it obviously connected to the marker, followed by several pages of equations and instructions. He immediately spun them along to the Grey Man. By the time she was done, 5 or 6 hours later, she was exhausted and shaking, ready to fall apart. He helped her back to her quarters and helped her lie down. "But," she was saying, it's still calling me to..." "Shh," he interrupted. "There'll be other times." 30 minutes later, he had the rest of the crew back on the bridge, including a replacement for Orthor. He'd made sure that everything was okay, then left. He visited Orthor in the brig and found him suspicious and resentful and paranoid. He had torn most of the bandages off his head and kept asking clumsily veiled questions meant to try to determine what had happened in his absence. Grotter stonewalled him, then left. He'd only been back in his own quarters a few minutes when the Grey Man contacted him by vid. "These are very good," he said. "Very helpful. They teach us a lot." "What do they teach you exactly?" asked Grotter. The Grey Man smiled. "Too early to say," he said, "but we need more. What are the conditions that led to this?" "I'm not certain yet," said Grotter. "A headache, I believe." "What caused the headache?" "I don't know," said Grotter. "What normally causes a headache?" "Check the marker readings," said the Grey Man. "But don't stop there. Find out what's going on down on the planet and how it correlates with what's happening with her drawings. If other data is an indication, there'll be a connection." "Other data?" The Grey Man smiled. "Need to know basis," he said. "Find out what you can, get her to do more. If it gets too dangerous, get out. Above all, keep both her and whatever's happening down on the planet a secret. Nuke the planet if you have to. If we get enough out of her, we'll be fine without it." Chapter 34. "They're not responding to our hail, sir," said the communications officer. "No," said the captain. "We'll keep trying. While we're at it, we might as well move into orbit." He turned to the navigator. "See to it." From near the back of the bridge, Jency watched. He wasn't supposed to be there exactly, but when he'd arrived, nobody seemed to give him a second glance. He was curious to see the planet from the air, curious too to get a sense of who or what might be down there, who would answer the hail. Apparently no one. "You have the right frequency?" asked the captain. "It's the same frequency we used before. Same coding. Same coding." "Try other frequencies," the captain said. "Other codings as well. Maybe they had to change it and neglected to tell us. See if anything comes up." But nothing did. At least not at first. They were just turning into orbit when the communications officer started picking up something on one of the distress channels. Play it out loud so we can all hear, said the captain. But, Captain... Play it, repeated the captain. He put it on. This is a warning, it said. This sector has become quarantined. All landing on Aspera is forbidden. Anyone and everyone must turn back, no exceptions. After a moment of silence, it repeated on a loop. Does that apply to us? Asked the navigation officer. Or is that just something they set up to scare the unauthorized away? Considering that we can't get anyone to respond to our hail, said the captain, I think it does apply to us. Something must have gone wrong. They kept trying to raise someone, without success. The captain stood placidly, apparently unconcerned. Shouldn't we turn around and leave? Jency wanted to ask. But he wasn't supposed to be there on the bridge, and his brother was, after all, down on the planet. He wanted to know what had happened to him. What do we do? Asked the navigator. Continue to establish orbit, said the captain. We have to figure out what to do about the supplies we were ordered to deliver. If we don't deliver them, we won't get paid. What about the quarantine? We won't send a vessel down until we can raise someone, he said. We'll be careful. And so they established a high orbit, hanging in the sky, still trying to raise someone, without success. Shall I continue, sir? Asked the communications officer. The captain hesitated, finally nodded, and so the officer went through each channel again, still without success. Maybe there was a prison break, thought Jency. Maybe they've been taken over. And then there on the screen in front of them, but growing larger, a tiny disruption in the space in front of them. What's that? Asked one of the crew. Nobody answered. They were slowly gaining on it, the disruption gaining in size to become an object. Slowly, it resolved into a ship. A sovereign colony's gunship, said the navigator finally. What's it doing here? Asked the communications officer. It's laying down orbital mines, said the navigator. They're sealing off the planet. Hail them, said the captain. There must be some kind of mistake. At first they didn't answer, but when the navigator repeated the ship's numbers and used the emergency frequency, someone finally answered. Grotter here, the man said. He wore the insignia of a commander, his face hard and craggy. Commander Grotter, began the captain. We have 3 months of supplies aboard. We cordially request... He trailed off. On screen, the commander had lifted one hand up to stop him, and was shaking his head. I'm sorry, the Commander Grotter said. You happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The captain stood there looking confused. On the screen, they could see some smaller objects gravitating toward them. At first, it was difficult to tell what they were exactly. Oh shit, thought Jency. The mines. He turned and began to run. Behind him, the bridge had gone into action. The captain barked orders as the navigator began to swing the ship around, but Jency knew it was going to be too late. He kept running as fast as he could, yelling as he went, raising the alarm. He passed over the elevator and slid down the ladder to the lower decks. Halfway down, the first mine struck, and he lost his grip, falling, clanging down the shaft. Above there was a sucking sound as the atmosphere began to rush out, and he was nearly dragged back up the ladder until the bulkhead shield rose and cut off the leak. He stood up and stumbled down the corridor, found a locker holding an astrosuit rig with an oxygen storage, and struggled into it. The helmet began assembling itself automatically around his head. From above came the sounds of screaming. A few more people had the same idea and were making for the escape pods as well, rushing toward him. Another explosion came, this time on the lower decks, and Jency and the people running toward him were sucked backward. He watched them spill out through a jagged hole and into space, and nearly went out that way himself, but managed to catch hold of one of the raggedy imploded edge and held on while the pressure equalized. He pulled himself back into the ship. The artificial gravity was disabled now, so he had to use his grav boots to find his footing. The sound, too, had gone strange, rushing out of the atmosphere. Everything now sounded dampened, almost non-existent. The noise of his boots clumping toward the escape pods was more of a vibration that could be barely felt rather than an actual sound. Almost the only thing he could hear was his own panicked breathing. He hurried forward down the corridor, floating now with the chunks of debris, only to see open space where the first set of pods should have been, though the next pod seemed intact. Behind him he heard a muffled noise, and then was nearly knocked off his feet by the shock wave that came with it. I'm gonna die, he thought, and then disengaged his boots and pushed off. but without gravity, it was hard to do it right. He immediately knew, directing himself too high was likely to spin out the open hole and into space. He tried to stretch and curl to change his trajectory, but little seemed to happen, and he was going out and drifting away. But then there it was, a piece of debris floating up above him. He pushed it as hard as he could. It stopped his momentum and sent him sideways at a slower pace, and he got close enough to the outer hull that he could turn on the anti-grav boots, then let them slowly suck him into it. He quickly clomped his way along the hull and worked his way around to the underside, running along the roof and down the wall to the remaining pods. One had its door open, and he saw, lying slumped on its entrance, Swanson. His eyes were bugged out, and he was half dead from lack of oxygen. Another man dead, he thought. He dragged the man up and out of his way and climbed in. The door lever slowly shut behind him. He webbed in and braced himself and then pressed the release and the ignition. The craft darted out, already spinning, twirling down through the atmosphere. He hoped it was small enough not to draw the mines, or that they would disintegrate in the atmosphere before they hit him. Twisting quickly planetward, he held on for dear life. Thank you. That was part 8 of Dead Space Catalyst. Thank you for listening, and good night.